Back in 2013, I was still new to the Philippines, been here only a year, and found myself living on Bohol, where I ended up meeting this really good buddy, Brian. So Brian, after having lived in Tagbilaran for quite a while, which is on Bohol, he then told me that he and his Filipina girlfriend that he was basically like common law married with. I mean, they weren't into getting married, but he didn't want to be with anyone else, and neither did she, and they were a good couple. So he started telling me about this plan that he had, which I thought was kind of crazy at the time. And his plan was that through her, in her name, he purchased or he paid for a plot of land. If I remember correctly, it was just under a quarter acre. And he started to build a house. Now, his plan was not just to build himself a nice little house. His real goal and objective was to live off grid as much as possible. And so as time went on and he did end up finishing with this house, I had to admit when he was done, it was a pretty cool idea. So that's what I want to share with you here are some of the specifics about taking an off-grid approach to building a home in the Philippines. Now, I know this question will come up, so I'll just address it right now. The question is usually, can foreigners buy land or a home in the Philippines? The land and the home are separate. You can own the home, but not the land underneath it. You would have to lease it or rent it on a long-term lease. This is why, as a foreigner, you can buy a condo. You own the condo, you just don't own the land underneath it. So you need to be a Philippine citizen to hold title to Philippines land. I won't even get into the whole issue about trying to do that through a corporation. You can research that if you want. So let's take a look at some of the specifics about building an off-grid style sort of home. Now, again, to some degree, you're still going to need to interact with society for certain services. But as you'll see, you can reduce that by a lot by doing the following. The first one is solar panels. Yes, solar panels are available in the Philippines, and they're much cheaper than they were 20 years ago when I first looked into them. You can usually put them up on the roof. That's what most people do. If you've got enough land, you can kind of like put some panels out there where it's optimized to face the sun. This then feeds the electricity created into batteries, which you then use in the home as well as during a brownout. Now, in case you're not aware, in the Philippines, there is an issue with power outages on most islands, especially when you're not living in a big city or in a condominium that has its own generator. So having solar panels would be a first good step to have in place as part of your whole off-grid approach, which leads to item number 2, which is having an on-site generator. You could kick that on when the power goes out. Again, presuming you don't have solar panels, you definitely want to get a generator. So if you're saving up the money for the solar panels, get the generator first. You can talk to the person at the big hardware place with regard to what the demand is you'll be putting on that generator. There are generators that will basically power up your lights, your sound system, your laptop, all the small items, including your cooking range. However, if you want to power a full-size refrigerator, television, and air conditioning, you're going to need a more robust generator to be able to do all that. So those 2 items deal with providing or storing your own electricity. The next thing is paying someone to put in a well. Having a well on your property is very doable considering the fact that you're living on an island and the water table makes having a well a very accessible idea. In case you're unfamiliar with the process, essentially a company comes out, they drill the hole down till they hit water, you then hook up a pipe and pump to bring the water up, again, using electricity, which then goes into a storage tank, which is on an elevated platform so that you've got gravity working in your favor to give you good water pressure into the house. I recommend 15 feet or at least at the height of your home so that you have plenty of water pressure. Now, between the water in the ground and the water coming to your house, in between there, you want to have a filtration system. The water that you get out of the ground is going to be very high in minerals. So you're going to want a filtration system that's going to weed out a lot of that stuff before it goes into your home to use for bathing and washing dishes and such. The next item is one that I have some experience with as a teenager, and that's raising chickens. Back when I was in high school, my folks who lived in a rural area thought it would be, I don't know, something to keep us busy or whatever, but they bought about 150 chickens. And we had enough land to keep them in a huge corral, and they had their own hen house and all that. And once you get the routine down, it's really not high maintenance. You do have to collect the eggs, and you will have more eggs than you know what to do with. You can give them away to neighbors, you can sell them, you can eat them, but you will have plenty of eggs. Not to mention chickens, which if you have an outdoor freezer, every once in a while, you could butcher a couple dozen chickens, chop them up, freeze them in bags, and you're all set. You could even sell those as well. So raising chickens is, in my opinion, a pretty smart idea. Plus, you'll know what you're actually feeding them, and you're going to get essentially free-range chickens that are not being raised on hormones. Of course, you'll have to check with the feed store to see exactly what is in the feed, but much of what they'll eat is going to be bugs and vegetation in the free-range area you devote for the chickens. Now, a lot of people in the Philippines are into raising pigs because lechon, which is the rotisserie barbecued pig, is such a big deal over here. Personally, I have been down this route. I had a dedicated pig farm with well over 50 pigs, and they were multiplying like you would not believe. It becomes a full-time job building pens for these pigs, because each time they have a litter, it can be anywhere from a dozen to 15 piglets, and they grow pretty quick. So you're constantly building pens. And another reason I would not personally get into raising pigs, even though it can be a lucrative business, is the smell. If you absolutely are intent on raising pigs, I can tell you, you will want to take some time before you start building the pens to notice which part of your land is upwind and which part of your land is downwind. You're also going to want to have a separate septic tank just for the pig waste, because they will create a lot of it, and you can't just dump it on the ground. You also need to take into consideration that you might have problems with the downwind neighbor once you've gone to all this trouble to put in pigs, because their place is going to stink. So personally, I'm not into raising pigs. Chickens, they will poop. You can put it in a pile. It'll dry out. You can sell that as fertilizer. It's great stuff. But not pigs. Pigs really do stink. The next thing in having a sort of off-grid sort of home environment in the Philippines is having a garden as well as fruit trees. Now, the garden, you're going to need to probably backhoe the ground up. Much of it, depending on the island, is either volcanic or it's clay. Either way, you're going to want to tear that ground up and bring in, depending on how big the garden is, maybe a truckload worth of good dirt that is fertile, brought from another part of the island, so that you have really good soil as well as good fertilizer to make it a rich environment for a good garden. I've seen places here in Bohol, and we've bought some for V's small garden that she has here, which they do a mixture of manure, ground up coconut shells, and rice husks. It's a really good fertilizer. If you happen to be on Bohol, they sell it right outside the Tagbilaran market. But if you're into gardening, or I've talked to a couple of guys, they're into hydroponics. which is a whole bunch of PVC pipe. There's not much dirt involved. You create essentially a rotating water system, and you can grow a variety of vegetables and berries or whatever. In fact, this was a very big thing in Vietnam at a place that I went to. But whether you go hydroponic or in the ground, having a garden, again, you end up with way more food than you can eat. So that excess can go either to the chickens or it can go towards sales to the local barangay. You could set up a little sari-sari store where you're selling eggs, you're selling chickens, you're selling vegetables, and all of it you're growing right there on your land. Now, fruit trees, either you're already going to buy land that has some mature fruit trees, or you're going to need to look at transplanting some fruit trees if you really want to be gleaning fruit from it. Now, the next thing I alluded to when I was talking about the pig farm, having your own septic tank for the household is another thing you're going to want to do if you're living out in the province. Because out in the province, which is the rural area, it is highly unlikely that there's going to be a sewer system away from the city. So having your own septic tank and remembering to put the necessary packets in there every once in a while to keep that whole biosphere healthy is going to be a part of living out in the province. Having, and this is very easy to do, even if you have no particular skills with brickwork or cement, you can do this. It's really very easy. And again, kind of downwind from the house, and it only has to be maybe 20 feet away, build 4 walls into a square as just sort of like a big box. You lay down a foundation, a trench, you put in your brickwork, 4 sides. Doesn't have to be that big. It can be about 3 feet by 3 feet and maybe 3 feet tall. And the purpose of having this is as a dedicated burn station for all of your burnable trash. So cardboard boxes, paper, all of that stuff that's burnable, you can reduce the amount of trash that you need to figure out what you're going to do with it. Because again, living out in the province, you might have trash pickup, you might not. But if you can burn 50% or more of your trash by putting in one container or in that area all of the burnable stuff, you can reduce the amount of trash that you got to deal with, which will probably be more like glass bottles and aerosol cans and that sort of thing. One other thing to really consider for off-grid living is a Starlink satellite system. This will give you an excellent signal for all your network internet needs. You pay for it one time and then you do the subscription, and you're not going to be at the mercy of the local signal or hope that they're going to one day put in fiber to your place way out in the province. You'll be able to know that you can have a solid internet system pretty much anywhere that you're going to live. Now, I know nothing is foolproof, and there's some people who say, oh, well, I did it and it was sketchy or dropped out or whatever, but compared to DSL or hoping to get fiber someday, and forget about wireless out in the province, you may as well go on dial-up. So Starlink would be another great addition to living outside of town out in the province. So I hope that gives you some pretty good ideas on what you can do. If you can think of anything else, feel free to share it in the comments, things that you've either heard of or things that you've done yourself, maybe different challenges about getting these things implemented. But I really do think that living off-grid, just outside of city limits, for me anyway, is the way to go. I know some people prefer the inner city life, but if you want to live out in the country, implementing some or all of these things is really going to make it a lot more enjoyable.